Welcome to the Mark midweek study part 4, where we'll be looking at Mark chapter 10 verse 1 to 12. Now this is a controversial passage and has been subject of much debate, and so today I want to present a view to you, and I hope you get something out of it. At the very least, you'll be able to spark off a lively discussion afterwards and actually talk about what your view has always been, and maybe the way that your view has changed over the years. But this is just a view that I'm presenting today. Where the setting is in Judea. Now this is the region that is ruled by Herod Antipas. And Herod Antipas is the one who killed John the Baptist in chapter 6. And the reason that he did was some conniving by his wife, because John opposed his marriage. Why did John condemn Herod Antipas's and Herodias's marriage? Why did she hate him so much for condemning her marriage that she would persuade her daughter to ask for his head on a platter? What kind of situation are you setting up there? Well, John condemned their marriage because Herod Antipas had divorced his wife, who was the daughter of the king of the desert lands or whatever, and he had divorced her in order to marry Herodias, who it was said was married to Herod Antipas's half-brother, Herod Philip. All a bit weird, for sure. But John had condemned this marriage, saying that Herod shouldn't have divorced his wife in order to marry Herodias, and that she shouldn't have divorced Philip in order to marry Herod Antipas, if that's the way that had worked. And so the Pharisees come to Jesus while he's in this region to ask him the question, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Now, was it just a coincidence, a happy, fortunate coincidence that they asked him? No, they purposefully did it, because the Bible says they came to test him, and they did it because they wanted him to take a position that would put him in bad standing with someone. There was a debate raging at the time around divorce, so there were two particular camps of that, which we'll go into in a moment. But apart from that, if he said, yes, John the Baptist was right, he'd be condemning Herod, potentially setting himself up for the same fate that John the Baptist had under Herod Antipas. Or he could say, well, no, I don't agree, and Herod Antipas is fine to have sent away his wife for divorce, and it's fine, but then he would be going against John the Baptist. And either way, some people would be saying that he'd be going against Moses, because there was a debate raging in the first century about Moses' words in Deuteronomy. So when they said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? Jesus could have said, yes, of course it is. Moses said it is, so of course it is. But Jesus answered brilliantly, as he did so often. He didn't set himself up against John the Baptist. He didn't set himself up against Herod. He answered with a question, which is what he so often did. He said, well, what does Moses say? And the Pharisees say, well, he said, yeah, that's okay. The Torah says that it's okay for you to divorce your wife. And Jesus once again goes right to the heart of the matter. He always addresses the heart. He looks at the heart rather than what's on people's lips. And he said, it's because of the hardness of your heart that Moses permitted a certificate of divorce. How does that work? Well, back then, the man was the only one who could give the certificate of divorce. And it was lawful for a man to have multiple wives, but not for a woman to have multiple husbands. So when a man would divorce his wife, he was relegating her to a life of singleness or a life of sinfulness. She either had to stay single, and back then no welfare support system or anything like that, so she had nothing to live on, or she could join herself to a man again, but that would have been sinful and unlawful. And so really, she was powerless. And so when Moses said, yes, you can have a certificate of divorce, it was as a thing for the woman to be able to get on and marry again and have a support and all that kind of thing. So that was what Moses was really doing. This was a loaded question. This was a charged question, and Jesus answered it brilliantly. He refers them back to Deuteronomy chapter 24, which is the only place in the Bible where it's written about divorce, in the Torah, where it's written an instruction given about divorce. Now, the question wasn't, are you anti-divorce or are you pro-divorce? That was not the question. The divorce was a given. Divorce was assumed. In fact, even in Hosea, in Ezekiel, in Jeremiah, then God talks about divorcing his people. He talks about divorcing them because they've been unfaithful, because they've been a people who have neglected him, their spouse. They have been a people who have had idolatry in their marriage. In Exodus, he sets up the marriage contract. In the prophets, he repudiates that contract and says, I will divorce you, I will send you away into exile because you have not been faithful to me, Israel. So the question wasn't whether or not you could divorce. The question was, what were the grounds for a lawful divorce? Now, at the time, there were two camps of thought. There was weighty divorce. You could divorce for weighty matters, or you could have a no-fault divorce where you could pretty much divorce for any matter. When Moses said in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1 to 4, he said that if there's been something indecent happen, then you can get a certificate of divorce. Now, that something indecent, the Pharisees then separated out and they said, well, there's the weighty and then there's the something. And pretty much the weighty was things like abuse, neglect, marital unfaithfulness to the contract that they'd written up, or unfaithfulness as in adultery. But all of those things were lumped together under unfaithfulness. Then the no-fault divorces could be for anything. If you wanted to marry someone else, some young floozy caught your eye, then sure, that's fine to divorce for that reason. If perhaps you burnt the bread, then you could get divorced for that reason. You could divorce your wife and send her away for that reason. And so there were these no-fault divorces and there were these weighty divorces, and that was what the debate was. Then Jesus says, what does Moses say? He says it's because of your hard hearts, because of the way you treat each other, that he had to make this provision for divorce, because if you were actually the kinds of people that loved me and followed after me and were trying to do what I said, then you wouldn't send people away because of, just wanting to get out of a contract. And so Jesus then trumps Torah and goes all the way back to creation. He says, marriage was for a man and a woman for life. And he says it was for this reason that it was written that you shall leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife, because it's really important that you treat each other properly. You see, this whole thing, Jesus is talking about how we treat each other. You look at the passages either side of it, he's talking about how you treat each other. And he's saying marriage is one of the most important places to make sure you treat each other well. That's hard, as you would know, if you're married. But he's saying that still you've got to outwork it. And he's not legitimizing divorce. He's not saying, so everyone should get divorced. He's saying you should do everything you can to make it work. And then when they get back, so that obviously the Pharisees have got nothing to say. What can they say to creation account? What can they say to what trumps even Torah, going right back to the start? And so when they get back to the privacy of the house again, the disciples ask him about divorce, about remarriage. And we've just given this one summary statement from that conversation from Jesus, where he says, if a man divorces to remarry, then yeah, that's like adultery. If you just get divorced because you want to marry someone else, then yeah, that's like adultery. And he aligns himself with John the Baptist and says, I agree with what John said. It was not okay for Herod to get married, but he says that in the privacy of the house because he's being wise. Now you might say, but Brian, it says elsewhere in other passages, in other gospel accounts, that the only reason that you can be divorced is for marital unfaithfulness. And yes, absolutely. That is marital unfaithfulness. Anything weighty all came in under marital unfaithfulness, whether it was neglect, abuse, adultery, unfaithfulness to the marriage contract, all came in under marital unfaithfulness. So yes, absolutely. Now, as we look at this, we're in a different day where we haven't got the same debates raging, and we don't have the same social constructs either, and we have a welfare system. Here, women were completely without rights, and Jesus is in the middle of this discourse on little ones, saying it's important how you treat people who don't have rights. It's important how you receive people. It's important that you take your rights and use them on behalf of others. Now, you might say, well, Bron, that's not the case today. And I'm sure we could all think of instances of people whose marriages ended where everyone would look at the man and say, well, he was terrible. But other instances where everyone would look at the woman and say, well, she wanted out from the start, or whatever it might be. That's to head down that line and talk about the power imbalance between genders. That would be to completely miss the point here. It's not what this is talking about for us now. This is talking about if you're going to be personally selfish and treat your marriage as someone who's just selfish and out to for your needs, then that's not okay. It's not okay. We're supposed to work through whatever issues we have. We're supposed to also not only work through the issues we have, there might be times where we need separation for reconciliation. And then there are also times where the situation is just untenable and there is marital unfaithfulness, whatever category it falls under. Or maybe it's unsafe. That too is marital unfaithfulness. And so there are situations where it simply is untenable. But let's not miss the broader point, because this is the meat in the sandwich of two discourses on little ones, where Jesus says, how are you going to treat the little ones? Now, for them, it meant make sure you look after those women who have been divorced. Make sure you look after them. And if you're a married Christian man, Jesus is setting up, and then Paul goes on to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I'm pretty sure, if you're a married Christian person, then you should do whatever you can to try and work through it. And if it becomes untenable, sure. But don't let that be your first stop, and don't let personally selfish reasons interfere. But the broader picture of what Jesus is saying is, how will you use your rights for people who have none? And so for us today, the debate's not raging. And in fact, even in the church, divorce is at the same rate as it is outside the church. And so looking at this broader picture, and is this still this thought of laying down your life on behalf of other people, of not insisting on your own rights, but doing whatever you can to lift up and help others? And as it relates to us, the church, maybe you didn't realize, but often divorced or separated people feel like outsiders. They feel like they don't fit the mold of what the church looks like. And so it is incumbent upon every single one of us, the church, whether you're divorced, single, remarried, married, whatever it looks like, to welcome every single person, not just into our gatherings, but into our lives. That we are those who are welcoming, because the Bible says that the little ones are those who receive the kingdom of heaven. And if we don't receive those little ones, that we're unable to enter into it. So we need to make sure that we receive whoever is on the outer as complete insiders, and make sure that we love and welcome others and do not be a discerner of people, that we actually love without dissimulation. And I hope that that's what we can do as the Church of Jesus Christ.